Good morning. This is Jim Whitehead of All Power Group, and this chapter 2 related to generators is called How to Buy a Generator. There's a lot of variables, a lot of instances where somebody might give you the wrong information as to the right size for the generator, so it's important that you know, and I will show you how you calculate or how we calculate much power your home needs, and then we can choose the proper generator. If we have to load shedding modules, the right size of gas, considering we want to make sure usually that you're going to be running, and we look at it 7 to 14 days. So it's important that we size everything correctly. Now, starting at the beginning, we're going to talk about the types of generators, and I will give you my definite opinion as to whether I think they should be considered in your list of choices. The first area is basically portable generators. They usually run on gasoline. They do have kits that you can modify one of these portable generators to run on propane or natural gas. You will find, though, that a generator dealer cannot modify a Generac product, so it would be somebody else that would be putting that in for you. The big issue with portables is, in most cases, it's gasoline. The largest Generac is a 17500, which is a pretty good size and can, in some cases, run a good portion of your home, including a couple air conditioners. But it has a 16-gallon tank that gets you, depending on the load, how much you're running on the generator, about 10 hours of running time. So it means that you've got to have quite a storage of gas on hand, and gasoline really isn't very fun to deal with. I show you a couple of different portables. The smaller ones are only really good for running minimal things in your home, like potentially your refrigerator, TV, in essence, things that are relatively low power. Now, the other area type of unit are generators, but they're called inverters. They're also relatively small. They are best used for if, let's say, you are going camping and you want to run some of your electronics. Power wave is relatively stable, and it's good for running, small amount of things. If you were camping, you needed a fan, charge your phone. You'll see a picture of exactly what people would use it for, and that's where they're camping and they have this unit that's pretty much perfect for the power. Now, the next area we go into is what we call air-cooled. Air-cooled are the least expensive standby generators. That means they're installed on a slab and they're not movable, and they basically are what we mainly call a home standby generator. They are in the range of, at least talking about Florida, they are in the range of 20 kW up to now they are up to a 26 kW. The point, again, when we talk about calculating the load that you need for your home, what you're running for your home, these could be actually too small, even the 26 kW. The biggest problem that generators have is, for example, most air conditioners have a very high startup amperage. It could be in the case of being 130, 140 amps. And what's interesting is once an air conditioner starts, basically needs that amperage to get the compressor running. But then once it's running, it takes probably 1/5 the power. The startup amperage is another way of saying is what we call locked rotor amps or inrush of voltage. So the smaller units, because these air-cooled units are basically 2 cylinders, it is a Generac built engine. They've been building this engine for probably over 20 years. It's a very good engine, but considering 2 cylinders and it's about 90 cc's in the case of being a V-twin, it really can only generate so much amperage. So again, if you have a home that you've got 3 or 4 air conditioners, even with load shedding, these will not make sense for you. At the end, I'm going to basically give you pricing, and all along the way, I'll give you individual pricing. But the point at the end of the presentation is we will give you a range of bottom line of pricing depending on the unit you buy. Now, the air-cooled units are and I'm only talking about the cost of the generator itself. They're approximately $5,000 to $6,000 for the generator. I will be adding and talking about additional costs that would go along with any of the generators. But the big thing, this is the first beginning of having something that is viable for some home situations. The next area of generators is basically what we call liquid cooled. They are as close as you can compare them to cars, and in the past they were using car engines as what we call the prime mover. Those engines could be Ford, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Chrysler, and the prime mover. And with my first presentation, we went into what a rotor and a stator are, and that's basically what generates the actual electricity. And the prime mover, the engine, is basically there to turn the rotor inside the stator. The unit that you're seeing now is anywhere from, it could be 100 kW, a 130 kW, or 150 kW, and it's got a big, in this case with the 150 that you're looking at, it has a 9-liter engine, which is pretty large. But the good news is now in a lot of these liquid cooled, the engines have been rebuilt, you might say, to actually be engines that are designed for generators. You get in a car, you start it up, you go to the store, you come home, it goes back in the garage. You know, you don't drive fast to the store. But the problem with generator engines, especially if you're using a car engine as the prime mover, they exercise under no load, meaning that it's not doing anything with power. It's just running the engine once a week, and then it's waiting for a power loss. You lose power, the generator could be now running for 3 to 4 days. So what you run into, especially, is in the sense, even like my 48 kW is an older unit. It's got a Ford 8-cylinder, 5.4-liter engine that runs on propane. As you would expect, it would be running on gasoline if it was in, and most of the time it would be in a truck. But they convert them so that they can run on either propane or natural gas. The engines now, you know, with it being a car engine initially, you only have approximately 4 to 4.5 gallons, quarts of oil. So what happens is when they're running, especially in the summer here in Florida, you really start to lose a little bit of oil. I'm not saying they're burning a lot of oil, but it's just the fact that it's so hot, and it's got to keep that engine, you know, lubricated so that it doesn't have any problems. So the new units that they have, either the 4.5-liter 4-cylinder or the 9-liter 8-cylinder, basically holds approximately 12 quarts of oil. So that will and is built for longevity to ensure that you can continue running for a long period of time. We also have, in the liquid cooled area, we go anywhere from a 27 kW. Now, kW means kilowatt hours. Excuse me, kilowatt. Or in the case of a 27 kW, it's 27,000 watts of power. That might sound like a lot, but a lot of homes, especially in Florida with multiple air conditioners, basically they're, could be a 30, 40, 50 kW home. So the 27 would be too small. The other one area I want to bring up is that we can also install a diesel generator. Now, I had mentioned in most cases what we install are units that run either on natural gas or propane. Diesel is another option. The good or bad news, the bad news is they're more expensive. The bad news also is that you do not have very much fuel, because you're looking at the picture, you'll see the base of the generator, which is taller, is actually where the diesel is stored. What you're looking at now is one that's about 125 gallons of diesel, which isn't a lot of diesel. You'll see other units that or choices you have is you could have one with a larger bottom tank that's in the 350 gallon range. The towns and cities a lot of times, and I'm going to get into permitting and what we have to do to demonstrate that we're doing everything right and that we're doing the right size generator for you. Basically, the code, I guess you might say, a lot of times has it where they have a height restriction. One of the liquid cooled that runs on either propane or natural gas usually is fine in the sense of how high it is, but the diesels in a lot of cases will be too high, and I don't know any other way to get around that. In Florida, especially South Florida, you don't sneak putting in generators or do it without permitting, because I can guarantee you will get in a lot of trouble. So that's diesel point. Another negative with diesel is, although the engines are great, they're designed for running for a long time, they would be better suited for if, let's say, you decided, I'm going to go to live in a cabin somewhere, and I'm not going to have any utility power, and I'm going to need a generator. So the diesels fit where you'd say it's going to run 24/7. So that's kind of the best way and why we would do diesel generators. The other aspect that's not so good with diesel fuel is the fact that it can go bad. Sitting there, God bless microbes, but if you leave diesel without treating it and it goes for a long time just sitting there, it starts to grow, some things that really are not what you want to have in your diesel fuel. So in some cases, if you don't take care of it, all of a sudden your generator will not run, and you will have to pay a service to come to your home, and they pump out all the diesel and filter it. And in some cases, they probably can't even get it back to being a viable diesel, and you end up spending money on getting new diesel. So you can see it's probably not the best idea to do a diesel unless you really have to. Now, the picture you're seeing now and these are not cheap. They basically kind of actually are on top of the list. They basically are mobile generators. And you don't want to call them portable because they're not really portable. They go on a specifically generator-built trailer, and they basically get towed around. Now, in the past, people used to get these because a generator is not permanent, as we would do with our typical standbys, where you anchor them, you put them on a slab, and you're not going to move them around. That has to be permitted for all the aspects of installing it. This type of generator, you kind of, in the past, and I'm probably still a little bit true today. You can skirt the issue a little bit on permitting because it's not permanent. But you see a lot of these portable units. In fact, Broward County has a whole parking lot full of these type of units that are designed so they can hook them up to a trailer, to a vehicle with a hitch, and they take it to wherever it needs to be, and it's used for the amount of time it needs, and then basically you take it away. So, it basically is not permanently installed in most cases. Most of these run on diesel fuels. So we get back to that expense and having it where if you let it sit and sit and sit, you're going to have a problem with that. The picture you're seeing now, and what are these pictures just showing you some of the costs that come into play in installing a generator. By the way, just going back on the liquid cooled, you can spend anywhere from $12,000 up to $40,000 depending on the size of the generator. So it's not cheap. But again, back to what you're seeing, it's a crane that we use to basically crane in generators. They've got an aluminum case, which is very good in Florida. It doesn't rust. But you've got to be very careful. In the older days when I first started in the business, a lot of times people would try to push them in on in the old Egyptian style, and they'd be pushing on the case. And that is not the right thing to do. And you can really damage the case. And so what happens is you crane them in. What they have designed is the generator is built right into a steel foundation plate, and that has 4 holes, one on each corner. And that basically has it where that's designed for it being lifted into place. So craning could be anywhere from $500 to $1,500, depending on the distance we have to crane the unit, the type of crane. The bigger the generator, the bigger the crane. It's just is unfortunately part of the cost. What you're seeing now is how we basically connect these generators to your home. We have to integrate what we call a transfer switch on the side of your home that goes between your power coming in, all your breakers and what have you, and this goes between the generator and what I just mentioned. Now, the picture you're looking at is one, and they have a variety of different types of transfer switches. This one is one if you've got a builder that's building a new home. And yes, they already know at the beginning and during the plans that it's going to be a generator is going to be part of the installation and construction of the home. So this has it where it's kind of a combination transfer switch, and the top hole is where your electric meter goes. So it kind of reduces the price a little bit in the sense that with a lot of new homes, you'd have a whole separate box or two with what I'm going to show you next. But again, you got to make this is only good when it's building a new home. Now, what you're seeing is what I just mentioned in the sense of what you have to do with transfer switches with an existing power. So on the right, you're looking at, in this case, we've got 2 services coming into the home where you see the meter and the box right next to it to the right. That is approximately 400 amps that's coming into this home. And in that gray panel, you would have two 200 amp services. So what we're doing with the transfer switches, we are installing 2 200 amp service rated transfer switches. Now, the next picture, you will see where you want to get into. When I started talking about calculating the need for your home, the amount of power that you require. In some cases, let's say you have a home that's 40 kW, and how basically the towns and cities look at it is you have to calculate it for worst case scenario. You can't make your plan with a generator to say, well, I'm not going to run this and I'm not going to run that, I promise. Well, what if you're not home? So what you're looking at now are load shedding modules. And let's say, for example, you had, as I said, that 40 kW home, and we're going to run it on a 30 kW generator. Well, you can, if you take a little math and you go 40 minus 32, you are 8 kW off. So if you submit that to the town or city that you're going to run a 40 kW home, and I'll show you a picture of the load calcs, that they're going to go, is this the first generator you installed? Because you're leaving a gap. And when you run more than you should on a generator, sometimes it will run, it won't shut down, but the actual amount of voltage, and even more so, the hertz will drop. And we are on the standard in the United States of 60 hertz. These load shedding modules, we put them on, let's say, a pool pump and a water pump, a sprinkler pump, things that use a lot of power that you could potentially go without when you have a power loss for any length of time and you want to make sure the generator is happy. So these load shedding modules, what they do, they're autonomous, but they're basically monitoring the 60 hertz. And by design, when the hertz drop to 58 hertz or less for 3 seconds, the unit basically, this load shedding module will say, oh, I can't run what I'm connected to, so I'm going to take that offline. Now, the good news is it's not permanent. How we get into, like, obviously in Florida or anywhere, during the day, especially in the summer, your power use on your whole home is different than it is at night due to the heat. So the load shedding modules will just keep an eye on it and say, oh, okay, I can probably run that now, and it will bring it back online. So the good news is it's kind of a two-way street. The next picture is just another example of load shedding module, and it just has 12 circuits that can basically you can control with your phone. You can have it where, yes, they go off automatically if they have to, but also you can control it with your phone. So it's a pretty good addition. In this area, you're looking at load shedding modules anywhere from $150 up to $800. So, if let's say you were needing 4 load shedding modules, that's about $400 plus the electrical installation. Now, let's get into the next big area of costs and what you need to do. What you're looking at is a 1,000-gallon propane tank, buried propane tank. One thing I have to point out, they say 1,000 gallons, but really it is actually only holding 800 gallons of fuel. The other 20% space is basically the liquid propane that has gone back to being a gas. So that's why you don't technically have 1,000 gallons. Now, you can do, and you're looking at 1,000-gallon tanks, a tank, you can go down to a 500-gallon tank. You can even go down to 250, but highly unrecommended. I say to customers when we do our installations or putting the plan together, please put as much of, the largest amount of tank gas potential that you can afford. Now, typically we do a 500, 1,000. We've done multiple 1,000, and you'll see that in a minute where we literally did, on this property, you'll see about 5 tanks, but we actually even had more than that on this property. There is a rule in Florida that basically has a limit as to how much propane you can have on your property. But this was such a big property, the gas got so spread out that they made an exception allowing this to happen. The other tank choice that you'll see are above ground tanks. And in most municipalities, towns, and cities, they only allow for under 500 gallons. And typically we will put what we call 120s, and we will put up to 4 120s, which will bring you below the 500 gallon limit. Now, talking about the multiple tanks, there you see, and this was a fun job, long term. That is literally, we've got about five 1,000 gallon tanks. We have 2 other 500 gallon tanks on the property. And so you can see that this particular person wanted 2 generators installed, and they wanted to make sure they never ran out of fuel. And that's pretty much where they were. Now, I'm going to show you what I mentioned a minute ago, and that's the above ground tanks. They're safe. They're built to be above ground. They have to be put on a flat, in this case, slabs. They also, and you'll see the box, that's an anchoring kit. You have to auger on each side and run cables through the holes in the top of the tank and really lock it down so that nothing's going to make those tanks susceptible to moving, whether it's by wind or water. And I hate to say, water's getting, and we just had a short time ago, down here in South Florida, 1,000-year flood. And the good news is they would still be in place. Now, people might say, are these dangerous? There's certain rules where you can't have them near windows. You can't have them, near electrical sources. And that could either be just a plug that's outside. It could be a light. So there's very strict rules of where these can go. And so bottom line, I've said many times that if you have any danger issue, it would be maliciousness, where somebody just comes and decides to whack the tanks with a sledgehammer. Never happened. You know how things can happen. So again, you're safe as long as they're installed correctly. Whatever you do, don't create enemies. So I'm kind of joking, but it can happen. Okay, the next thing I want to show you. This is a picture of a natural gas meter. They, in the sense of the availability here in South Florida, I would say no more than 10 to 15% of homes here have natural gas. Now, natural gas goes brought to your home via underground lines, and each home has where it comes up and goes into a gas meter. Now, the gas meter there is designed for two reasons. One is to know what they're going to charge you for how much gas you've used. They've always got to have the bill. But also, they help with, depending on the size of the meter and the size of the pipe that you're looking at, we have to size them accordingly in reference to ensuring that we have, we're giving the proper amount of gas, pressure, and volume. So that's important. Another cost basically is where we monitor your generator. That could be $300-400 a year with your service. So again, adding all these in and the costs, you can see that it starts to add up. Another area that we talk about when we talk about the above ground tanks, okay, we're talking about monitoring, and another expense can be where you're monitoring the propane. Typically, above ground tanks don't really necessarily need them unless you're very elderly. But I do admit, any of the below ground tanks, they are, when you open up the top, you don't know what's going to be in there and how hard it is to actually get to the gauge to see what and how much gas you have in the tank. So now let's talk about one of my favorite areas, and that's basically what we have to do permitting wise to get these installed. We first, and you'll see what we call a load calculation. That's done by my electrician, and he goes through your specific home and calculates everything that's there and the power that they use. Yes, we can do a little calculation related to the air conditioners. Air conditioners are not on all the time, but believe it or not, in a lot of cases on the load calc, we have to calculate worst case, and that would be if you were running your ACs in heat mode. Admittedly, we haven't had too much cold weather anymore, but when we had a real cold snap in 2010, and we had some folks running 4 ACs in the heat mode, and that's about 40,000 watts right there if you add them all together. So the load calc shows us about how much you're going to basically use for power. Now, what you're seeing now is what we submit to the town and city, and it's all based on the generator that we have together, customer and us, on what generator should go into your home. Now, I do admit sometimes people get, and understandably, are on a budget, and if we say you need a 48, and the 48 now is probably $15,000 just for the generator, and that's my cost, they're going to maybe say, when you add all the other numbers, and we'll get into a final range of pricing at the end, they'll say, I can't afford a 48. So what I said earlier, we have those load shedding modules. And to a certain degree, we can... Okay, here we are. We're talking about the load calculation, and when it comes to the total amount that we need to run, we have to put into calculation as to the size generator that we've chosen. And if we do and don't do any more than that, if we say, okay, you've got a 40 kW home and we're going to run it on a 26 kW, that's not going to work. We have to demonstrate that we're adding ancillary peripheral equipment that basically will load shed enough of your higher power above the generator so that you're not running more than you should. So that we have to follow this very closely. The biggest thing we do with when we do this together, we there's a limit to how much load shedding you can put on. If you've got to put more than 4 load shedding devices, in my own opinion, and you'll get different answers on this, you are actually doing too small a generator, and maybe it isn't time to do it now. The next form that you see, when we decide and we're all happy on load calculation, my electrician has to do what they call an electrical riser. The riser is in this case is an electrical diagram that shows everything we're going to do. You've got your existing power, you've got your existing service panels, and we're showing how we're going to interface transfer switches, the wiring we use. We also have to talk about what we call control wires that basically communicate between the transfer switches and the generator. And this is extremely important because the bigger the generator, the larger the wire. The longer the run from the generator to where your electrical is on the home, the larger the wire it has to be. So this is very critical. What happens with wire that's too small, when you're running power through it, it basically will heat up, and that's not good. So we have to get it right. This isn't where you can save money. It's really where you have to do it right. From there, we go into now, and I'm a gas contractor, but now what we have to do is say, okay, the generator is this size, and we calculate the size of the generator as to the number of BTUs that it needs. By the way, you will not be tested on this. And we have to calculate the distance that we're going to run the gas line from the gas source, and let's say a propane tank, to the generator. So combining how much your generator needs to run correctly and the distance, we come up with pipe size. Now, since we have, if you haven't noticed, since we've find it much hotter than it used to be, especially in the summers, we've had to upsize. So if my calculation says I need a 3/4 inch gas line, which comes from the tank and it's buried, it's going to be down 12 inches deep. If it's 3/4 inch per my chart, we probably, believe it or not, will go up to an inch or inch and a quarter, inch and a half, which one would say you can't downsize. You can't say if I'm supposed to use 3/4 inch, I'll use 1/2 inch. Can't do it. But if it says 3/4 inch and I say, well, I'm going to go to up to an inch and a quarter, that's okay. And I find generators run so much better by doing this excess infrastructure. So from that, I have to do a gas riser, very similar to the electrical riser, but this shows what size the generator is, and we have what we call, standards, and from the charts and the BTU requirement and the distance, we basically show everything you'd ever want to know as to the size of the pipe, size of the regulators, and size of the generator, so that we are demonstrating that generator is going to be supplied correctly with gas. What you're seeing now in Florida, this might surprise you, or maybe not. We in Broward County, Dade County's higher, Palm Beach is a little lower, which only is based on Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Broward County, we have to show engineering for the slab, and the slab having the generator on it and it being anchored to 175 miles per hour. Now, most customers say, what if my generator moves? And I tell them honestly, it's low. Actually, air can go through a generator because it's got vents on all around. I said, if your generator moves, I'd hate to see you home. And I don't mean that as a joke, but that's what would happen. The last piece of work that I'm showing you is, I know it's a little busy, it just hopefully gives you the idea. We have to get a updated or current survey of your property. And we have to, and this is very accurate, I have to use a scaler. It's like a calculator with a wheel. I have to show everything, where it's going, distance from here, distance from there. One of the rules, for example, is that the generator, where the exhaust comes out of the generator, you have to be 10 feet from any opening in the home. And that's a door, a window. It even is the soffits that are up in the eaves area for a little ventilation of your attic space. And there's no it's 9 feet. No, it's very, very specific. Related to the tank, it's got to be 10 feet from any building. And that's where we've had trouble with zero lot lines, that maybe we have it where it's not 10 feet to your home, but it might be 10 feet away from your next door neighbor. We can't do that either. And a lot of times people have pools and the whole backyard is a pool. So you can see that this is not like we plop it down and any place that it goes is good. We have to show this indication. We have to show how far from the street. We have to show basically, we can in some cases put a tank buried in the front yard sometimes, depending on the town and city. Some say yes, some say no. That said, we have to make sure that we're showing where the electrical is, and the tank can't be too close to where that is. It is just, and sometimes I've looked at jobs that we actually cannot do because of this particular sheet when we calculate and we say it isn't going to happen. So anyway, I hope you've learned something from this, and I really, really enjoy doing these, and you really are helping me since I am no longer in the generator business directly, but I'm doing the content on something I've done a very long time, 18 years with generators, and now I'm doing content creation that I actually love. I want to thank you very, very much again, and please stay well.